Okay, welcome back to another episode of Backprop. I'm Andrew.
I'm Sarmad, and we're the hosts of this podcast where we just record ourselves talking and discussing things happening in the AI space. So what do we want to talk about today, Andrew?
Yeah, I guess it's two things and maybe how they come together. One is MCP. The world is so excited about MCP, what it can do. So we'll talk about everything about MCP. We have an expert here. And then the second is agents, right? Agents might have been more popular on top of people's minds before MCP took off, but extremely powerful, still early stages of, how these play a role in companies, in use cases, and then the question that everyone has in mind, which is how do these come together?
Right.
So since we have you, Sarmad, the expert in MCP agent, all things MCP related, I would love to just begin with what is MCP? How do you explain MCP to those who might not be familiar with it, and what role does it play, I guess, in software?
That's a really important thing. And so first, I think just like explaining the acronym, MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. And it's basically a protocol that allows you to give LLMs context in a structured way. And we know that, that's the big challenge with LLMs these days because they're so good, they are able to reason, they're getting smaller, faster, better, but they're still only as good as what context they have available to them. And so context can mean a bunch of things. It means good prompts, it means data, and it means tools and access to resources that are external to the LLM. And so that may be, access to your Google Drive or access to your calendar application and how to interact with the world around it. And so far in the AI space, because we've all been moving so quickly, we haven't really had a standardized way of doing this. So people have built either frameworks or one-off ways of connecting LLMs to tools and building agents on top of that. But MCP is the first time that we have a protocol that codifies how should a tool connect to an LLM, or how should a service, an external service, give access to AI systems for its APIs. If you look at developer platforms today for Stripe, which is the gold standard for developer documentation, a lot of those things were written for humans and human developers. But a lot of systems today that are interacting with these services are run by AI models, and so you want to enable semi-autonomous workflows, which means the agent needs to be able to interact with the world around it the same way that a human developer could. But we need to be more structured about it to be able to build better agents. And so Anthropic created this protocol to enable that. It's inspired by Language Server Protocol, which is something I worked on at Microsoft as well, which really revolutionized how developer systems are built in IDEs, how language services are enabled for like Python developers or TypeScript developers, and it's all done in a structured way. So any language server developer can kind of implement a really high quality language server and then have that be accessible in many different IDEs, from VS Code to Sublime to Atom and so forth. And I think MCP is going to do the same for AI development, where you have so many model providers and you have so many different LLMs. And so how do you kind of standardize the protocol with which these systems interact with the world around them? And that's why I think everybody's really excited about it. So we can dive into a bunch of these areas, but that's also how it relates a little bit to agents, because better protocols means more deterministic kind of workflows that AI systems can follow.
So I read something interesting, which was MCP is almost analogous to either HTTP or REST APIs.
Yeah.
And there's definitely some noise and hype around, is this going to be the next wave that unlocks how different MCP servers or applications can interact with each other?
Yeah.
And if you have to think back to the founding of some of these core principles to how services interact, it's kind of that momentum where people can use that to build amazing applications.
Yeah.
In what ways do you feel it is reminiscent of that? In what ways do you feel like it might differ from that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think it does follow the lineage of protocols, that came before. HTTP is definitely a foundational one, but also, MCP builds on top of that. It uses JSON RPC and a couple of other specs. But then I think the other one that comes to mind is SMTP for email. You can use your Apple iPhone email client and connect it to any mail provider. And similarly, a mail provider like Exchange or Outlook or Gmail can implement the protocol and make it self-accessible to any email client. And so there's this nice handshake that happens between a client, an email client, and an email server. And I remember one of the conversations we had with a customer months ago was she was the director of data science at a large insurance company, and she said, "Why do I have to implement all of these pieces of my RAG pipeline from scratch in the same way that everybody else is doing, but slightly different from my custom infrastructure, when I don't have to do that with email? I just set up Exchange for my organization and it kind of just works." And I think that's the right way to think about MCP, is that standardization allows us to leverage services and build that interop points between clients. So far clients are like Claude Desktop or Cursor, which are able to talk to MCP servers. But I think as MCP continues to grow, and it's growing really rapidly, we'll see more and more apps becoming MCP clients. And then they can talk to all of these services that expose servers that are compliant with that protocol. And you can just imagine, how beautiful that world looks because of the standardization. Everybody can align on a single way of exposing themselves to LLMs, and then building applications on top of that.
And the question that I'm sure listeners have top of mind is, now where does the LLM play the role, right? What's that key component of the LLM that has unlocked this whole wave of new, almost, application server development? Where is that magical piece?
So I think it's in a couple of places. The way I think of LLMs in general is they're intelligence engines. And so you use them in places where you need some kind of intelligence, usually in an unstructured environment or in a non-deterministic environment, for them to be able to use their reasoning capabilities to perform things that are either kind of vague or cannot be codified. Otherwise, you just write a computer program to do it, if you could codify it into simple rules. And so I think the LLM plays a role in a couple of parts of this. One is actually the building of these complex workflows. You can give, and maybe let's say you have you give access to your Gmail, your Google Drive, and then you say, "Hey, fetch the stand-up notes from the last meeting, and then send an email to the team about some action items." And if you give access to MCP servers that are connected to those services, then the LLM can take that fairly unstructured kind of ask, break it down into a series of steps, call the right tools in the right order, and execute and complete, and then maybe give you a confirmation, or ask you for follow-ups if it needs that. So I think it's that basically that reasoning engine that's able to create structure out of chaos or vague requests. And then you use it in very strategic ways inside your program. And then I think the other side of this is, as LLMs continue to get better, you also want to figure out how much autonomy you give them. So the other example is, maybe you give it access to a code interpreter, and it can actually just write code directly and then execute it in a safe sandbox. And then that's part of the workflow as well. But the really cool thing with MCP is you could expose the code interpreter as an MCP server of its own. So maybe it's connected to Replit or some other kind of execution environment. And so it really opens a lot of interesting possibilities of separating the client and server interaction models.
So for listeners, you might not be aware, but Sarmad had early intuition thinking that this was going to be quite big. I like to say 4 or 5 months ago, you're like, oh, this has the real potential to change how people are building these applications. And as time went on, interest has really grown. So I'm curious, what was your early intuition on MCP has a lot of potential? And then what were the signs, I would say, the last 4 months, even maybe culminating to the last few weeks, that showed you that more companies are taking a bet on MCP as opposed to a little bit hesitant of, will this really take hold? We don't know. There's a lot of protocols out there. What makes this different?
Well, I think one thing I was thinking of the other day was being early in the AI space is basically like a matter of weeks and months these days, and so for some more context, I think I saw MCP come out last November, so it's actually only, I think, 4 or 5 months old. And I immediately could see that this will be very revolutionary for the community. And it goes back to like the earliest days when we started Last Mile, before even like LLMs could make tool calls. When I think we shared there needs to be a kind of like a foundation model protocol for governing how it interacts with the world, how it interacts with memory systems and the like AI services and even like traditional SaaS services. And so this I saw as a culmination of that. And again, I'd worked on LSP before, so I saw, if you look at the Microsoft LSP documentation website, there's hundreds of implementations now. And it's basically like, people don't remember how difficult it was to build an IDE back in the day. And just a few years ago, that like all changed. And so I had intuition that, I think if we build the protocol right and if it reaches adoption, and again, a protocol is only useful if like everybody accepts that that's the standard, then this could have the same impact that LSP had for IDEs. And so that was like the source of it all. And then the second thing that I had in mind was the protocol itself is very low level. Even today, it's like it deals with message passing and transport layers and how authorization should work, and those are all really important concepts, but developers need a higher order way of building applications with it. And so I saw this opportunity almost of what is an application framework that's basically a very lightweight kind of implementation of the protocol look like, that allows you to build agents and allows you to build these more complex AI workflows, because that's what really people are looking to build. And that's what this unlocks. And so why don't we make it easy for them? So I built that over the Christmas break. The GitHub repo is MCP Agent, very aptly and simply named. And I think the idea is to maintain like a very simple, lightweight library that implements the protocol, exposes the AI agents and workflows that you build as MCP servers themselves, which is like a little hard to reason about, but basically, you have a server of servers, which is able to connect with other services, but then itself can be connected via an MCP client like Claude or Cursor or something to run that workflow. And so I think the future is all about basically how does the standardization take place. And then the last point that you asked, what are the signs of this becoming standardized? Is from startups all the way up to larger companies, I'm seeing more and more MCP compatible services, and it's a two-sided marketplace, right? On the one hand, you need servers that implement the protocol so that there's like useful capabilities that agents can use. And on the other hand, you need clients and developers that are like, this is useful, so I'm going to build apps with it. And I see both sides kind of like sprouting, and really, especially on the server side, there's a lot of really great servers out there. There's official implementations of things like Quadrant, VectorDB, but also Slack and a whole bunch of other services in between. And then developers are really like, they see the value of this, and so indie open source like contributors all the way to like enterprise developers, we're seeing a lot of traction on adopting the protocol. And so again, if everybody accepts that this is the protocol, then it becomes so. And then we iterate and improve, and it's still early days, it's only 4 months old, but I think the future is really, really bright for MCP.
Yeah, I think almost, it's gotta be every day we see probably a growing number of MCP related applications on Hacker News or GitHub trending, probably 4 to 5 of them, and it keeps getting more and more. And then we saw Microsoft Azure release MCP support for some of them, their services, as well as OpenAI. And it does feel like it's swelling. The interest is swelling, and the number of companies and leading companies that are now integrating with it is quite high, and so staying ahead of it is really important. Now, you touch a little bit on MCP Agents, which is our rising star in open source project that's doing very well, getting a lot of interest. I would love to know more about why agents and MCP, right? So the vanilla MCP release from Anthropic was you have your MCP servers and you have clients. And then you worked on getting the agent concept baked into it. What was that inspiration, as well as you know that there's going to be a need for it, and kind of explaining that rationale?
And by the way, one other data point on this is OpenAI released their agents SDK, like a lightweight agents framework, and it didn't come with MCP support. So I created an issue, and then I also implemented like an extension package using MCP agent to add agent support or MCP support to that. And it's like the most liked GitHub issue on their repo. And so I think everybody's basically coming to terms with the fact that people want this to be a thing. I think in terms of like building agents, my main observation was it's fine to have like a Gmail MCP server and a Google Drive MCP server and a Notion MCP server, but really like the value is actually combining those into being able to build workflows across them. And so it's not just a one-to-one kind of interaction model where I don't want a chatbot just to talk to my Gmail, a different chatbot just to talk to my Google Drive. I want there to be an AI system that has access to multiple services that's able to decide by itself when it should invoke different tools from different services and string them together in more complex workflows. And then, agents, we've talked about this before, there's levels of autonomy you can give it. So you could encode some rules. You can say maybe like there's a file system search agent that only has access to like the file system server, MCP server. So you kind of limit and constrain a little bit. Or you can give like to completely open-ended things saying, here's the list of like 100 MCP servers, go figure out based on like arbitrary asks. And I think as like models evolve and workflows change, we'll come to like different kind of models of that. But but just conceptually, it still stays the same. You want a system that is able to connect with multiple services that you care about and does so in a secure way, and is able to then build and orchestrate things that are a combination of those services. So I think that's the basic realization, and then MCP Agent is basically a way of building applications and agents with that core concept in mind. And my real inspiration for this was another blog post that Anthropic had towards the end of last year, I think December, called Building Effective Agents. And it kind of like showed what we've been seeing as well, that to build really good agents, you actually don't need a very complex architecture. In fact, it's, I think, code smell if your architecture is super complicated to get an agent to work well. It should actually be more like simpler kind of primitives, like everybody needs routing, everybody needs, some kind of evaluator. There are a couple of these primitives that you can add, but if your architecture is super convoluted, then it's actually not that great. And so based on that, and based on like some of the learnings of the earliest movers in the agent space, I basically built a very simple kind of like agent framework that gives you core concepts, like there is an orchestrator, there is the idea of like a multi-agent swarm that can interact with each other, but then it kind of like is very opinionated about that, and it just adds a lightweight layer on top of MCP beyond that. So in my opinion, it's like the simplest way to build really effective agents with MCP today.
Yeah, it's very cool. So MCP agents, we're seeing a lot of usage, a lot of traction, and you're seeing all the different types of ways that people are creatively thinking about this problem. I'm curious, what are the types of problems that you spotted early on as that's very cool? That's something that wasn't feasible, wasn't possible 6 months ago, a year ago. Now that things are standardizing a bit more, where there is a framework layer for the orchestration, then you have the servers and a client, you can do a lot more interesting things. What's one where it was like, that is a really cool moment? Yeah.
I think so the repo has a whole bunch of examples, and a lot of them are actually community contributed. So it's really great to see just organic community traction. And one of the users, developers, eval state, he added this agent that has access to a code interpreter via a Docker container, and there's a file of like gyroscope data, I think from your smartwatch or something, and then basically you ask the agent to chart out interesting things using matplotlib from the data, from the raw data, like it's just a CSV with numbers, and it's incredible what the agent is able to produce after that. And the architecture of the agent is relatively simple. And so for me, that was the realization that you can really build super sophisticated applications now with very little, like the total code is like 80 lines of code, and MCP and MCP Agent handle most of the complexity under this covers. The other thing that I think is really important is I'm seeing more and more applications no longer be just hidden in chatbots. We've talked about this a little bit before as well, that AI is so much more than just a chat interface. It should be given its due beyond a chat UX. And I think people are realizing that as they're building more and more sophisticated workflows. And I think actually workflow orchestration is the right way to think about it, where you have pause, resume, retry, wait for human feedback or human input. And if you encode like the agent workflow in that model, then you can expose it in a chat interface, but you can also run it like as a background job every night, and so those are kind of the things that I see happening going forward that MCP makes easier, but also like I think we need to just adjust the architecture of agents a little bit to enable them outside of just chatbots.
Have you seen some, I guess, interesting use cases from companies? I know it's very early, right? That really did impress you, where you're like, oh wow, that's a very interesting use of MCP that is starting to push the boundaries of what's possible. I know it might be a little too early to have these applications in production, but the number of companies that you've seen that are exploring it and seeing how they can extract value out of it is extremely high.
Absolutely.
So
there are a few ones actually. So one of the things, like any, the MCP community reminds me of probably what early days of computing were like very hacker kind of mentality, early adopters. And so it's finally like starting to have, it'll evolve very quickly, and it has more and more established like enterprises join the fray. So some of the things that come with enterprise scale, one is, your services may require statelessness. Currently, MCP was stateful. They're adding streamable HTTP, which allows it to be more of a stateless kind of interaction model. But then, you have like hundreds, maybe thousands of API endpoints. And so the tools that an LLM has access to is like an enormous number. So one of the things I'm seeing is a company I spoke with, they are looking at like embeddings as a way of filtering tools based on like the context that the LLM is operating on, to decide which of, even within an MCP server's tools, should I let the LLM know about in the context of the runtime of that at that point in time. Which is like, we've looked a little bit at that with RAG, where you would like do embedding like k-nearest neighbors to retrieve relevant like chunks, and so I like the same approach being used to retrieve relevant tools to tell an LLM about. And so there are these interesting architectures that are coming. Those are not encoded in the framework itself. The other thing is evals, which becomes even more important, I think, in a world where we give LLMs more power and control and autonomy. How do you judge if an agent is doing a good job or accomplish its objective? And we're seeing some companies look at simulation, and others that are trying to like do it more in a like structured breakdown, intermediate steps, evaluate each step kind of way. And it's really exciting because it's very early. Those are like the earliest use cases I'm seeing, but I think scale brings with it its own set of problems, which now we're seeing the protocol adjust to.
Yeah. It's interesting. So for the folks who have yet to try MCP or MCP Agent, the folks who are just, maybe they've heard of someone talk about it, maybe this is the first time they're hearing about it, what do you recommend to get started? Right? What's that thing that you're like, this is the first thing you should get started just to familiarize yourself with it?
I think first it's like really easy to build a simple server. So if you have like any kind of fast API application or any one of your own services, just write a wrapper with an MCP server and you can build an MCP agent in like 5 minutes to connect it with the config to your server and just ask the LLM to do something with your services, which you yourself know a lot about. I think that's probably the coolest aha moment of seeing it being used for something that you're like engaged in and you know about. And then beyond that, I think if you're building agent applications with like other frameworks, or pre-MCP ways of doing things, I think just trying to translate that into what it would look like with MCP is a really good way of kind of seeing the before and after. Because it's one thing for us to talk about, in abstract what a protocol kind of standardizes and what problems it solves, but to really see it in action when you compare how simple it is to do the same thing as an engineer and a developer, I think that would really help people get on board. And also just contribute. It's a really fun community as well right now because it's still early days. It's only 4 months old, and so I just encourage everybody to get started. And I know you've really taken an interest in looking deeper into it and thinking of it from a product perspective and how it relates to the previous generation of AI systems that came before. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what are your thoughts on the space and MCP in general?
It's cool because I think when you do really think about this as changing the paradigm of interaction between systems, it's, if you think of it as everything will change and the LLM that's orchestrating and connecting the systems are going to be more foundational, then the entire way the applications everywhere will change, which is really interesting. And it's fascinating to think about that because as you have a lot of companies out there that are building systems that connect a lot of systems together, you have a lot of internal tools that do that. And then it's a mandatory thing for most companies to expose ways to interact with their services through some type of protocol. If this becomes a standard, then how does that look like in the future? Right? And that really changes a lot, and so it's exciting. And the worst I would say, if current trajectory of how it's being used stays, it comes to a really effective productivity tool. And so the potential is massive. It's either a huge productivity gain for folks when they're able to seamlessly interact through an MCP client into a agentic workflow, maybe a MCP agentic workflow, or directly with the servers. Now they can do a lot more, or they actually go even a step further and everything is kind of this exposed as an MCP server. And so it's quite cool to think about. It's an interesting time. I feel like oftentimes in AI, the technology is so powerful, you often try to reimagine what the world's going to be like. I think a lot of times you think technology, when you're building, let's say, a new, I used to work at Airbnb. When Airbnb came out, when you reimagine hospitality, you can only reimagine so much, right? And yes, the paradigm can change, but not to the extent that AI keeps imposing. And every time AI comes with something really novel, it kind of shakes the foundation and makes you rethink how everything's done. And everything's in question. It's not like, oh, it just helps me write essays. Now it's like, what if we move it to the lowest layer? What if we have devices that are optimized for it?
Yeah.
What if we use it on the operating system layer, the network layer, application layer? It's all over the place, and so very cool. I'm super excited for MCP. I'm excited to see how it grows.
Yeah.
I've just got a glimpse of its potential, connecting to Slack, connecting it to Linear and these types of systems.
Yeah.
And I think it's only going to get more powerful.
And while you were talking, I think I thought of like the way I'd sell someone on MCP is if you look at the previous generation of, and it's crazy, previous generation just means like tools and frameworks and services existing last year, right?
Yeah.
Of ways of building AI applications. It really didn't work for customers, because, and we know this. You know, most of those applications are still stuck in POC mode and struggling to get into production. And there's all sorts of ways of like reasons for it. But I think, if in one sentence, if I had to summarize it, I think MCP is one of the key missing pieces that will help build production-grade AI systems this year. And it's very early. It's still, just getting started. We're starting to take a very serious look at like what this. Let's reimagine, how application development works from the nuts and bolts of it with this paradigm. Then I think it's like really worthwhile for companies, especially, to start taking a serious look at it, because this will, I think, be the way AI infrastructure becomes standardized and really production grade, both this year and then like a stable foundation for years to come. We're just a very exciting time. We're just privileged to be able to play a part in it.
It's in the we're in the thick of things. I think MCP Agent is doing phenomenally well, and it really goes to show that people are interested and willing to embrace what the future holds.
And completely organically as well. That's the thing that I feel really pleased about is, we did maybe one Hacker News launch and that was it. And yet it's been on like GitHub trending and people keep like submitting PRs, and it's just so nice to see, I think, just the organic traction. So that's just very exciting.
Amazing. And so any final words of wisdoms with MCP Agent, if you had one sentence to say about it, and we'll probably do another podcast about it later on. So
I think build applications with it. No words of wisdom. Just we'd love to hear from people as well on what developers build and try out, and what we should support next. We have some ideas on like where to take MCP Agent from here as well, but we'd just love for it to be community driven as an exercise. Just check it out and try building applications with it. That's the best way to learn.
Amazing. And with that, thank you for joining us. Please check out MCP Agent on GitHub, and as you build applications with it, let us know. Reach out to us. We'd love to hear use cases. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.